There are many different ways to tackle a horoscope. Different texts, different traditions tackle a horoscope differently. They try to read the chart, interpret the person, and make predictions with completely different techniques and completely different ideas about how to go about it. In this course, we're going to cover the method used by Parashara in Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, which is the foundation book of Parashara Astrology. And the surprising thing about that text is it was recompiled in the late 1800s after having been lost for probably well over 1,000 years. So it's kind of a new, old book, okay? Because it was recompiled by someone running around India finding bits and fragments of it. It's not a perfect text. There's some errors in it. There's a few things missing. There's a lot of things that added that probably never were meant to be part of the book. But still, it's one of the two most important texts on astrology. Unfortunately, it's not a text that's been really studied that much because it's a difficult study, because it's relatively new, and it hasn't even been studied as much as a lot of the older texts, or not older texts, the other medieval texts like Phaladeepika, Jataka Parijata, Jataka and all these other classical Sanskrit textbooks on astrology. But it's by far much better than all those other texts. The only other text that's equally important is Jaimini Sutras. Okay? Now, what makes this text unique? To convey that to you, I'm going to talk about sort of the different ways you can read a natal chart, a birth chart. Okay? There's different branches of astrology in India. We're just talking about birth chart astrology here. We're not talking about prajna, things like that. Just natal astrology. There's a few ways we can tackle that. Okay, one way, and the commonly used way in India until the 1900s started, was through yogas. Okay, what are yogas? Yogas are planetary permutations that yoke or yoga you, unite you, connect you to a tangible result. So a yoga for wealth, a yoga for marriage, a yoga for fame. Planetary permutation that unites you, yogas you, connects you to some tangible result. The majority of Hindu astrology books written in Sanskrit are just filled with yogas. If this planet is here with this planet, this is the effect. What in the West we call cookbook astrology. Okay? Now yogas are of different levels. There's some yogas that are great. They're very unique permutations that give a concrete, reliable, statistically replicable result. Okay? And lots of times you can't figure out why they do what they're doing, but they do it. Okay? Those are good yogas. Those are useful yogas that are well worth memorizing. Then there's yogas that are sort of more cookbooky stuff of trying to help you understand the effects of a bhava, but don't really do a good job of it. For instance, if the 7th Lord's in the 8th, you'll have 2 spouses. Well, if we know our basics from astrology, we already know the 7th Lord, the spouse, in the 8th house of breaks, can likely cause a breakup. Okay? So a large part of the yogas in most of the classical texts are filled with those type of sort of useless yogas that are reiteration of not only basic principles are good, but unfortunately incomplete and poor basic principles. So they're garbage yogas. But then there's some really good yogas too, okay? And those are well worth learning. I've covered some in the video so far, and I'll be covering a lot more here in the near future. So one way to judge planets is yogas, and that's what most books cover. Most of the classical texts on Hora. What is Hora? Hora is natal astrology. Okay, I'm not talking about prajna or any of those other texts, of which there's some really unique ones. Then another way to make predictions is with a technique. Let's see. A technique. Now what is a technique? And by here I mean specific techniques, not global techniques. For instance, a technique that is a specific thing you do only to find the amount of children that a person will have. Or a technique that you'll only do to see if the person's going to have a short, medium, or long life. You know, or a technique that you're only going to do to see when a person's going to get married. It's a specific technique that follows a rule that only applies to one single thing. Most of the astrology texts out there, the classical texts, have a couple of these techniques. Some have more than others. But in general, most of those techniques don't actually work that well in practice. For instance, back in 1998, I compiled all the techniques for determining the amount of children from all my textbooks, ended up with 43 techniques. I tested all those techniques on a big database of charts, and I found that only 16 of those 43 techniques gave me 4 out of 10 results, worked 40% of the time. The rest of them worked 20 or 30% of the time, meaning 2 or 3 times out of 10. 40% is not a great result, but predicting the amount of children is not a yes or no answer, right? It's not a yes or no answer. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You know what I mean? It's a possibility. So 40% results is pretty good when you look at it in that context. But it's not good enough to stake your reputation on, because when it comes to making a prediction, you say 4, they have 5, you're wrong. Okay? Because even though predicting the amount of children is not a yes or no answer, there's not just 2 possible answers, there's 10 possible answers, or in an average family, let's say 4 possible answers. You know, anything better than 25% is showing a technique that's somewhat accurate. So I took all the ones that worked at 40% or better, and using them all together and finding the confluence between them, which ones showed the same amount of children most, I was able to bring the technique up to a 60% accuracy. Okay? So that gives an idea how accurate some of these techniques are in the majority of these texts. Not that great. Okay? Especially when you have to learn 16 techniques to give a reasonably accurate, because 60% is a good accuracy rate for something like that. But to learn 16 techniques like that to do one thing, it's not really great. You should have one technique that should do 60% or better, and that would be a great technique. So they have all these kind of techniques to do this and add this, and when Jupiter crosses this point, you'll get married. Does it work? Hardly ever. Okay? The majority of the classical texts have those kind of techniques, meaning techniques you don't want to learn because they're not going to serve you well. The huge exception to that is Jaimini, or Upadesa Sutras. So Jaimini's Upadesa Sutras is unique in that it is a complete technique-centered book that gives specific techniques for specific and important things, like what are you going to do for a living? Are you going to become wealthy? Yes or no? Married? Yes or no? Children? Yes or no? Or how many? And where you have miscarriages and or abortions. Your spiritual life, what it will consist of. When you'll die. When your spouse will die. When your parents will die. When your siblings will die. Very concrete techniques where each technique only applies to one thing, but it does it in a very accurate way, much more accurate than any other technique out there. I always say a Jaimini technique, when it's done right, will give 80% or better results. If you're not hitting 80%, you're not doing something right with Jaimini techniques. That's an awesome success rate for an astrological technique, okay? So, by specific techniques, I mean a specific technique that applies to one type of thing. Okay? This type of astrology is not done very much. And if it is, most of the techniques people use don't work that well. I've seen traditional astrologers in India who have a technique like this. Some of them might have a technique that works really well. They won't teach it, they won't share it, they won't write about it because it's a technique that helps them do one thing well. But the majority of them have these techniques and they don't even work that well, and they'll use them on one guy and it won't work, and that client will leave and another client will walk in, they'll use the very same technique without even trying to figure out why it didn't work on the previous guy. And they're just not great techniques, okay? Jaimini Sutras is the exception to this. Those techniques are well worth learning and a critical part of becoming a great astrologer. Alright, the next type of way to read a chart is using a formula. What is a formula? A formula is a technique, it's one technique that applies to everything in the chart. So with one technique, you can learn about children, marriage, wealth, career, fame, success, health, everything. It's a one technique, a global technique that can be applied to any subject, any topic in the horoscope with good results. Okay? In the late 1800s, Sri Yukteswar complained about, Sri Yukteswar was Paramahansa Yogananda's guru, who was known in India not as a guru, but as an astrologer. He was really respected as an astrologer in his area, more so than as a guru. Okay? But Sri Yukteswar complained that people are not doing scientific techniques of astrology. They're just memorizing yogas, as many as they can remember. And when they see the yogas in the chart, they can make a prediction. But they're not really learning to do astrology in a scientific way, the way it's meant to be done. He was talking about these two ways. Jaimini's techniques, and then specific formulas that apply to everything. He was particularly, I think, referring to these formulas, a formula that can be applied to any area of life. Not like a specific technique, that one technique only applies to wealth, but you can't do that on anything else, just wealth. A formula that applies to everything. And around that time, Brihat Parashara was rediscovered. Jaimini Sutras, all 4 chapters were finally discovered of Jaimini Sutras. So we finally had the 2 texts that had this. Also at the same time, Krishnamurti Astrology was developed. Krishnamurti is a formula-centered astrology. Some of the better astrologers I've seen in India are Krishnamurti astrologers. Then other systems came out. Systems approach came out. Again, it's an attempt to use a formula to read a chart. I don't find system approach to be a great system, but it is a system at least. It's at least trying to systemize astrology. Then Iyer came out with his Iyer system, which is quite popular these days. It's a decent system, but it's pale in comparison to Parashara's system. So there's these different systems being developed. So we're sort of in the age of where Sri Yukteswar would have wanted us to be, of trying to develop and learn systematic approach to astrology, where we have a formula that we apply in a systematic way to read anything we want about the chart. One super technique to handle everything. And that is exactly what's in Parashara. It's not anywhere else. It's poorly attempted in a book called Shripati Padati, but you won't get good results trying to use what's in Shripati Padati. It's only covered in Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. Okay? So between Parashara and Jaimini, you can learn all the techniques. The global formula of Parashara that covers everything, and the specific techniques of Jaimini that cover isolated things. Now, as part of Parashara's formula, Parashara has a formula for yogas. We've got Parashara's yoga formula. Okay? Now, Brihat Parashara, like all other texts, has lots of yogas. Planetary permutations that when they're found in the chart are going to give a specific effect. He does this for every house lord in every house, which is 144 yogas. He gives important yogas like Lakshmi Yoga, Gajakasara Yoga, and all these types of good, important named yogas. He has plenty of yogas in it. And so obviously Brihat Parashara believes in yogas and wants us to use yogas. And he also gives us a formula for judging the yogas, which is an important thing. Why is that important? Because a yoga yokes you to something. Okay, it yokes you to something, it changes you to something, a effect that you're going to get for good or ill. Well, it's always a question of how tightly are you yoked. Okay, let's say I weigh 150. Well, I weigh like 190. Okay, I weigh 190 pounds. Now, if I'm yoked by the neck with a chain that can carry 100 pounds, and somebody's pulling on that chain, it's going to really hurt, but it's not going to hang me by the neck until dead, right? To hang me by the neck until dead, that chain's going to have to pull 191 pounds or more up. Then it'll pull me off my feet. But as long as that chain is not pulling off my feet, I can hold on to the chain and I can fight it and I can eventually pull that thing down and survive. It's the same with yogas. If we have a yoga that's going to kill your spouse, we have to look at how strong is your spouse's health and how strong are the killing factors. If they're as strong or stronger than her, they're going to kill her. But if they're not as strong, they're just going to make her sick and ill and miserable, but they're not going to kill her. There's a huge difference in predicting, oh, this yoga says your spouse is going to die, versus this yoga predicts you're going to have a spouse who's always sick and weak. There's a huge difference between those two worlds. So Parashara gives a formula for examining yogas. No other text does that, which means no other text is complete in yoga theory, even though most of the classical texts just have yogas after yogas after yogas. Like I said, most of the classical texts, the yogas found in them are not that useful, but then there's some real jewels. With a little experience, you'll learn to see which ones are worth using and which ones are just reiteration of basics, okay? But the two big exceptions to that are Jataka Tattva and Sarvata Chintamani, which both have both of those are the best yoga compilation books you can find, okay? Especially, I think my favorite is probably Jataka Tattva. A lot of cool yogas in that. Things like, if the Navamsha Lord of the Lord of your second Lord is Saturn or Mars, and in an angle or trine with malefics, you'll be a master of 6 sciences. So these crazy techniques for yogas, for great intelligence and spirituality they have. And they work. When they're there, they work. Okay? So there's all these cool yogas you can learn, but you need to judge them. All yogas are not created equally. Parashara covers that. Then the other thing, so that's part of Parashara's formula. He has a formula for judging yogas, which we're going to learn. Because most people learn a few yogas right off the bat. They at least learn the yogas of an angle and trinal lord conjuncting, okay, or aspecting each other. So there's always some yogas people know. And there's lots of good yogas worth learning. Then there is Parashara's formula for examining the planets and what they're going to do. And that's the best part of Brihat Parashara, because that's what we do with astrology. We have to study a planet, see what it's capable of doing, and see what's it going to do that to. Now, the planets create and produce everything in the world. Everything you have in your life, from the biggest thing to the person you love the most, is created by the planets. Okay? The planets are the conscious, creative forces in the universe. That's why they're called karakas, which means a producer. They produce things. Okay? And all of them produce everything. Now the things that are produced, the concrete, existing, physical thing, is indicated by the Baba cusp, or the house cusp, okay? Those 12 points in the zodiac, and those 12 points taken to the Varga charts, all represent the concrete things in life. Your spouse, your children, your furniture, your wealth, your friends, your house, your car, your game, your hobby, whatever, your bicycle, your treasure chest, your harem, I don't care, your vacation, anything that exists in your world is indicated by a house cusp or Baba cusp in the chart. And what happens is the planets have a capacity to produce or to destroy. And most of them have a dual capacity. Sometimes they're doing well and they'll be really productive. And other days they'll just be disgruntled and ruin everything. Just like we are. One day we wake up and we're ready to make our love life work, and we get the flowers and we go give the flowers to the girl or whatever, or the guy. And everything works magically. And other days we're like, I'm just not going to put up with the way they treat me anymore. And you go out and you end your relationship, right? Planets are just as moody. Depending on the forces imposed on the planets, they're either happy or miserable, and as a result they either create things or destroy things. Just like we do in our own lives. We're sick of work, we're miserable, we go to work and we ruin our job and make ourselves get fired, or we walk out of there and quit, right? Or we're excited and happy about our job and we go there and we do a great job and are extremely productive. And we'll do the same thing with same job. You know, for 3 years we'll just be the greatest worker, and one day we'll just go, I'm out of here. Planets are the very same way. So the planets are feeling a certain way and behaving in a certain way. As a result, they'll create and destroy the things in our life, which are the bhavas. So Parashara's formula for examining the horoscope means we examine the planets. And how do we examine them? In the most brilliant way possible, with something Parashara calls avashtas, which are the condition of the planets. We examine the condition of the planet along several different ways. There are several types of avashtas. And each avashta tells us something about the planet's condition. And after we understand the planet's condition, we can see what the planet's going to concretely do or not do, or create or destroy. So we examine the planet's condition in light of the planet's strength. A planet's strength is known by its Shad Bala, which is a very comprehensive method of seeing how much muscle a planet has. And then we see what the planet's influencing. Meaning, what bhavas is it influencing? Planet feels a certain way, has a certain strength to do something, and exerts that influence upon the bhavas, and therefore creates and destroys everything in your life. That's all that's happening in astrology. Okay? It's easy, right? E-A-S-I. That's how easy astrology is. And that's what we're going to learn in the Parashara, in this course on Parashara's formula. We're going to learn how to examine the planets in light of the avashtas and their strengths, and then see their influences to create and destroy our universe. Okay? It's so easy, I can't believe it. Myself. Okay? And the reason is, it's kind of funny. How did I get into dealing with this Parashara astrology? Well, I started out that Parashara was the first textbook I bought. I bought it for myself on my birthday in 1995 because I thought Vedic astrology might be a cool way to go, because I'd been doing Western and it wasn't real satisfied. So I brought Brihat Parashara and started reading it, calculated everything by hand over the next month, and tried all these crazy things and calculations and dashas and different ainamshas, and had a great time. And I worked on Parashara, and then I was given an extensive library of every English textbook available, whether Sanskrit translated into English or written by modern authors. I had a huge library at my disposal. I studied all that over the next 3 years. Then, in 1998, end of 1998, I decided to go to India, and I needed money, so I sold most of that library off to a good friend and student of mine. And that helped me get my visa and stuff to get ready to go to India. I kept a few textbooks. I kept, some of my favorite classical texts, but pretty much all the modern astrology books, all those were gone. I just didn't care for them anymore. Kept a couple of important classical textbooks, and I figured I could buy them cheaper in India anyway. So I pretty much sold, even all my classics except for maybe Brihat Parashara and one or two others. And so I only had a very small library to take to India. So when I got to India, I replenished my library. At the very end of my stay there, so beginning of 99, I got into Jaimini. And that was after really 4 years of mostly focusing on Parashara type astrology, but with reading a lot of modern authors as well, and reading B.V. Raman's, all of his books and everything. Then I got into Jaimini at the beginning of 99. In Jaimini, I was like, wow, this is cool. Taught myself Sanskrit so I could translate it. And I focused on Jaimini for about 4 years. Okay, almost 5 years, until beginning of 2004. And in the meantime, I wrote 3 books. I wrote a book on Muhurta, so I spent a lot of time on Muhurta. I wrote a book on yogas. I wrote Vault to the Heavens, which was more Parashara system. So I worked in all that other stuff, but my main point of focus when I had free time was Jaimini Sutras. And there's a sutra in Jaimini where he says, Hora Adaya Siddha. Hora Adaya Siddha, which means perfection from the Hora, etc. Well, Hora, etc. means the Hora Varga and other Vargas. Hora, Drekana, Chapter, Tamsha, and so on. So the last sutra of the first part, Jamie says, Hora Daya Siddha, which means if we want to be perfect, we got to know our Varga charts. Jamie doesn't give any information on Vargas. Most texts don't. The one text that has extensive, by Hindu astronomical text standards, extensive stuff on Vargas is Brihat Parashara. So in the beginning of 2004, I dove into Parashara to learn more about Vargas. And I started noticing a lot of things that I just wasn't smart enough in my early days to really pay enough attention to. Things that I tried manually by hand and I didn't really have success with, so I gave up on them. Things like Ishta and Kashta, Shubha and Ashubha, the Avashtas, things I was using in an isolated fashion like everyone else who'd ever tried and decided it didn't really work. And that's called people call that mathematical astrology. In fact, Raman wrote a book called Mathematical Astrology where he gave all this stuff. And he basically sums it up that this stuff really doesn't work that well. It's really just better using the traditionally used yogas and stuff like that. That's what Raman's conclusion was. And that was everyone's conclusion, mine included, because when you just use Ishta, and it's, and Kashta, meaning the good and bad parts of a planet, all the time you're finding planets with more bad are doing really good results, and planets with more good lots of times leave you struggling and in a bad way. So those mathematical techniques just didn't seem to work. Why didn't they work? Well, because Parashara doesn't tell us how to use them. He just gives us the calculations. Okay? Essentially, he tells us 1 plus 1 is 2, 2 plus 1 is 3, 3 plus 1 is 4, gives us all of our pluses. Then he gives us our times table. 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 3 is 6, 2 times 8 is 16, 2 times 12 is 24, 12 times 12 is 144. He basically gives us calculations. So now we know the calculations. But what do we do with them? He doesn't tell us how to use them, what to do with them. And you can imagine if you were in math, and your teacher taught you your pluses and your multiplications, and then you really thought about those things and you figured out that pluses were just like minuses, and multiplication was basically the same as divisions, same principles in reverse, right? And you figured that part out on yourself. Your teacher didn't even tell you that, okay? And then you get this equation, y equals 2x squared plus 3gy da-di-da-di-da. You get this huge equation with like 8 factors in it, with 8 variables in it. And now you need to solve that equation. You don't know, and it's all written with proper set braces. You know how equations, you've got your 2 times 10, and that's in a set braces, and you put a 3 over here, which means divided by 3, plus 15, again in set braces, and you got all this weird mathematical braces and stuff. And those braces tell you what to do, right? They tell you how to work through this mathematical formula. But imagine trying to do a big equation like that, where you have no idea what a brace is. You don't even know why it's there. You don't know what a brace means in that equation. You just know your times tables and your multiplication tables, and then you figure out your divisions and subtractions all on your own, and then you're given a big formula to solve. That's what Brihat Parashara is like. He gives you your pluses and multiplications, and gives you the huge formula with no direction of how to apply your pluses and multiplications to solve that formula. So in 2004, I started thinking, okay, this is what he's doing. He's giving us all the calculations, and now he's expecting us to figure out what to do with them. Sounds fun. I think I'll spend a few months figuring out how to use all these things together. How many things are there? Well, there's how many things? Shadbala, Ishtakashta, Shubha Ashubha, Digbala, Shubha Ashubha, that's 5. Baladya Vashtas, Diptadya Vashtas, Shayanadya Vashtas, Jagaradya Vashtas, Lajitadya Vashtas. Did I miss any? 10 things. So that's like 10 variables in the equation that we're supposed to work with now. And you can imagine how many different ways we can try to make those 10 things work together. It's like in math, if you take 10 numbers, okay, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 numbers. There's a million things to do with those 10 numbers, right? We can go 1 plus 2 divided by 3 minus 4, right? Times 5 times 6. You know, that's plus 7 plus 8 plus 9, and all that divided by 10. Or, and that's going to give a certain answer, right? Or we can just take this brace away and add plus 10 here, and now we get a totally different answer. Or I can just say, just put 9 and 10 in a brace and with a division between it. Plus 9 divided by 10. I get a whole different answer. You see what I'm saying? With 10 numbers, the order I use those numbers will give me completely different answers. And so that's what I found myself struggling with Parashara. I had 10 factors, 10 possible calculations or things to look at the planet, and millions of ways that I can add and subtract and multiply and divide and play with those things to try to find a coherent result. So that really quick, I'll spend a few months trying to figure out how all these techniques work, all these mathematical principles come together, turned out to be 8 years of hard work. Okay, literally 8 years of figuring out how to deal with these numbers. And some of you, the first class I taught, I just dealt with Ishta and Kashta. And I found a way to use Ishta and Kashta in a useful way. And I taught that first time in a class in Dallas. Then I taught that to my own group, my own phone conference group or something. Then I kept playing with, and I kept coming up with a little bit of a better way to use these things that Parashara did. And every time I felt things were a little more accurate, better, more accurate than before. Okay? But literally, it was 8 years before I felt what I would call happy with it. And a lot of you have been studying with me since 2004, and you'll see that over the years, the tables in Parashara have changed, or better word maybe is evolved, where those tables have gotten different, or the numbers have changed, or different things have been considered in a different way, in order to try to make the most accurate use of the final number and that comes out, the final part of the formula. So finally, after 8 years, I'm satisfied with the way I'm adding and subtracting all these different things in Parashara, to where this Parashara class that we're teaching now is going to be it for me. When I'm done with this class, it's done. I don't see any other ways of making it any more accurate than what I'm going to teach you now. And again, this is techniques that no one's used in thousands, at least 1,000 years, probably more like 2,000 or 1,000 years. No one's taught, nobody uses any of these techniques I'm going to teach in this course, the Avashtas or any of that. The reason being because, like I said, trying to figure out how to put all those different variables Parashara gives together is extremely frustrating. And using any of those variables in isolation doesn't work. Okay, it doesn't give you the answer you want. And so astrologers haven't used them. And I've been using them since 2004, with each year with somewhat better success. And like I said, I finally have it where I don't think it's going to be possible to improve upon it. I just think this is as good as the formula is going to work. And I'm really, really happy with how it works, okay? Now, what does the formula consist of? Okay, well there's two parts to the formula. Because Parashara deals with two parts of astrology. He deals with yogas, like I talked about, he has a lot of good yogas. And he deals with a formula for judging bhavas or making concrete predictions. When we judge a bhava is the concrete existing thing. What we're really doing is we're making a concrete prediction. So Parashara does both of these things. Okay? Yogas and that. As a result, he has two distinct formulas. One is a formula for judging yogas. Now, I taught this initially in a watered-down version compared to what you're going to get it in this time in my Judging Grahas as Karakas course. Most people found that a really easy and accurate way to read charts. Okay? And it was so easy and so accurate. And in that course, I used Ishta and Kashta. And in that course, judging yogas as karakas, I basically just used one yoga from Parashara that we use to judge karakas, where he says, if the karaka for mother or father is hen by malefics or has malefics in the 4th, 6th, or 8th, it will destroy the parent. That's the yoga. Malefics on both sides of the parent, which is for the son, is both sides of the father, or malefic in the 4th, 6th, or 8th will kill the parent. That's a yoga. And I showed how to use that yoga along with Ishta and Kashta to qualify the yoga, basically, to really see if it's enough to kill the parent or just hurt the parent. Okay? Well, in this course, we're going to have a formula for judging yogas. We're going to use Ishta and Kashta plus the rest of the things we need to judge yogas more perfectly. So you can consider this first part of the judging, the formula for judging yogas is going to be an improvement upon the judging grahas as karakas course that I taught back in 2005, I think, 7 years ago. 7 or 8 years ago, a long, long time ago. Okay? That was a great course. It works extremely well, but this is going to just give you a little more accuracy. Plus, I'm going to show you how to judge all other yogas as well. So any yoga you learn, Gajakasari yoga, Lakshmi yoga, yoga for this planet, or this house lord in this house, any of those yogas, you'll be able to judge, okay, using Parashara's formula for judging yogas. The other part of Parashara is his formula for judging planets and what they're going to create or destroy, which means their influence on the bhavas. Because the only things created or destroyed are the physical forms, which are the bhavas. Okay? And for that, we're going to use the avashtas, all of them. Yes, even Shainati avashtas. Finally, some of you have been waiting for me to teach Shainati avashtas a long time. Through the avashtas and the planet strength, which is this Shad Bala. Okay? So we're going to have two formulas with which we're going to use for two branches of astrology. The scientific replicable formula-centered part of astrology, of judging bhavas, and memorize as many yogas as you can, and then analyze those yogas according to a formula to see if the yoga's strong enough to give its full effect, or if only going to give some. So that would be a yoga that says you're going to be super wealthy. Okay? Well, how strong are those planets giving the yoga? If they're not super strong, they aren't going to give super wealth. They'll just might be your best day on money, which means you might get $500 that day. But in another person's chart, they might give 50,000 or something. So we have any yogas we need to judge so that we get the full extent of that yoga, or we can see what extent of that yoga will truly be given. And whether that's a good yoga or a troublesome yoga, we need to analyze it. Parashara is the only text that helps us do that. So those are the two parts of Parashara that we're going to cover. Now, I want to just talk briefly about some of the things that are really unique about Brihat Parashara that makes it just so much better than anything else out there except Jaimini. And Parashara doesn't compete with Jaimini. They're completely different systems that need to be used together, though, because they cover different things. But all these other textbooks are basically trying to compete with Parashara, and they utterly fail. They fail so bad, you really don't even need to waste your time reading them. Except you might find one or two good yogas, and you should read those, get the good yogas out of them. But the rest of the stuff, you really don't need to spend your time on. And what is the rest of the stuff you don't need to spend your time on? Well, things like planets and signs. Most of the other classical texts talk about Sun in Aries, Moon in Taurus, Mars in Taurus, planets and signs. You don't need to learn that. It doesn't work. They'll also talk about planets aspected by planets. It doesn't work. they'll talk about planets conjunct planets. It doesn't really work, okay? Why do none of those cookbook interpretations from the rest of the books not work? Well, first, none of those are in Brihat Parashara. Parashara does not waste your time with Mars and Aries, Mars aspected by Jupiter, Mars conjunct the Sun. Doesn't waste his time with that. Instead, he gives us the Avashtas, which let us see completely how any planet's doing in any sign. Because to say Mars in Aries is like this, and then say Mars and Saturn is like this, isn't always going to be true. It can be totally different. One Mars and Saturn and Aries person will be completely different than another person's who's got Saturn and Mars and Aries, for instance. Because the planets are in a completely different condition. So Parashara gives us the formula for knowing exactly what a planet's doing in any sign in a holistic way, which means also based on the planets it's joined, also based on the planets it's aspected by, also based on its degree in that sign, which is important. All based on a comprehensive way where all those factors come together to give that result. And to try to arrive at a result just saying, oh, this planet's conjunct this, or this planet's in this sign, doesn't give you a lot of accuracy. So Parashara doesn't waste his time on that. He cuts right to the bottom line of telling us all the ways we need to examine the planet, and then we can come to our conclusion of exactly how that planet's going to behave based on its influences upon it. It's a much better way of doing it. Instead of memorizing a whole bunch of lines of planets and signs and planets conjunct planets, which the other textbooks want us to do, Parashara just tells us 5 sentences to learn how to use. And once we can learn those 5 sentences, we can look at and make a better interpretation about any planetary position than anything written in any of the other books out there. Okay? So we're going to use that particularly in the context of predictions in this course. Okay? I covered a lot of that stuff as far as behavior and nature in the Interpreting Avashtas course. So that's a good course to take, and it's easy, and it'll get you into the flow of these Avashtas and things. Alright, so these are the 2 things we're going to cover. And this is going to, when you're done with this, you're going to have 2 of the 3 important branches of natal astrology under your belt. Okay? The 3rd branch is the Jaimini Sutras or Upadesha Sutras branch, which lets you figure out the amount of kids, the extent of fame, time of death, and those type of things that you might want to predict about. Other than that, the other techniques that are out there are either more timing techniques, but they're not really for reading the chart anymore. They're just more like timing techniques of the when. There's lots and lots of timing techniques. Okay, so you'll always be learning new and cool timing techniques. One of the best other timing techniques out there is Varshafala, or solar returns, thanks to the Persians who came into India and left that in India. And then there's prajna techniques, or horary techniques, for answering a question based on the moment it's asked. That's a different, that's not really natal astrology though, okay? Then there's mundane astrology, predicting world events. A lot of this works in mundane astrology, but then mundane astrology has some extra principles because it's a whole different part of astrology. It's not natal astrology, okay? But when it comes to natal astrology, these are sort of the 3 critical branches. The yogas, a formula for judging the horoscope, see what's going to happen and when to judge the bhavas, and specific techniques from Jaimini that let us focus with one technique on one type of thing, whether it's marriage or children or money or whatever. These are like specialist techniques, very specialized. Parashara's formula for judging the bhavas and making predictions is a universal technique that once you learn that one technique, you can apply it to every area of life. And that's what's so great about it. Jaimini's, you have to learn one technique for one thing. That's not as quick to learn how to do everything as it is to learn one thing through Parashara and then apply that to everything in life. And while you're doing that, And a critical part of Parashara is the Vargas. You cannot do Parashara astrology without all the Varga charts. All 16 of them. Okay? Just like Jamie said, you have to use the Vargas if you want to be perfect in astrology. And Parashara gives us the information to achieve that high degree of accuracy with the Vargas. So this course is also going to have a lot of Varga information in it. Alright? So those are the two things we're going to learn here as we learn all about Parashara's formula for reading the horoscope, understanding and using yogas, and making predictions for the concrete things in our life via the planets and the bhavas. Okay? Thank you.